Okay, I hope I am audible to all the students who are attending this lecture. We start with the new topic today in microeconomics. So this is called monopoly. So this is a new unit altogether in our intermediate micro course. Okay, so and it's a very interesting topic. So let's talk about what is first of all called a monopoly. So a monopoly is a single supplier to the market. A monopoly is a single supplier to the market. So when we talk about a monopoly, there is only one firm who is supplying the commodity to the market. The firm is the industry itself, and the industry is the firm itself. That is, in case of monopoly, there is no difference between the firm and the industry. Firm itself is the industry in case of monopoly. Now, since monopoly is the sole seller in the market, the monopolist can choose either the market price. The monopolist can choose either the market price to charge or the quantity to sell, but not both. So when we talk about a monopolist can either decide how much price I want to charge. Based on that, it will face demand, or the monopolist can decide how much quantity I plan to sell. And based on that, we will determine the price. But we are saying that a monopolist cannot have control over both price and quantity. A monopolist has control either over price or over quantity. It does not have control over both price and quantity. Either the monopolist can fix the price, keep the quantity variable, or it can fix the quantity to sell and make the price variable. Okay. So what we are assuming is, so in our lectures, we assume that the monopolist chooses the quantity of output. Monopolist chooses the quantity of output that maximizes the profits, and then settles for the market price, which the chosen output yields. That means now in our lectures, we are assuming that the monopolist will choose the quantity of output, which will maximize the profit of the monopolist. And based on how much quantity the monopolist is producing, we will determine the price charged by the monopolist. So in our analysis, quantity is a free variable and price charged by the monopolist will be dependent on the quantity. So I can say in our analysis, price will be a function of the quantity. Monopolist will decide how much quantity to produce. That will be based on the profit maximization of the monopolist. And once we decide how much quantity the monopolist will produce, based on that, we will find out the market price. Okay. Now, before getting deep into the model, let's first understand how is a monopoly created. So that's the next thing for us. This is called as barriers to entry. Barriers to entry. So one major reason for a monopoly to exist, is that the other firms find it unprofitable to enter the market. So when we talk about barriers to entry, it is that feature which that characteristic which the monopoly possesses, which makes it difficult for the new firms to enter the market and compete with the monopolist. So now, within barriers to entry, there are two forms of barriers. Let's discuss them. Within barriers to entry, there are two kinds of barriers. One is called technical barriers. Now, what is technical barrier? So a technical barrier is that the production of the monopolist, the production of the good by the monopolist may exhibit decreasing marginal cost and average cost over a wide range of output levels. So one technical barrier which prevents the other firms from entering the market is that when the monopolist increases its production, its average and the marginal cost curves will start falling. This concept in microeconomics is famously called as economies of scale. Economies of scale simply means that when the firm does production in bulk, it causes the average and the marginal cost to fall with the output level. So such a monopoly is called natural monopoly. Such a monopoly is called natural monopoly, Once such a monopoly is established, once such a monopoly is established, entry of the new firms is difficult. Entry of the new firms is difficult. Why? Because any new firm must produce at relatively low levels of output, and at high average cost. Okay, so this is one technical barrier. It simply tells us that when the monopoly enters and when the monopoly gradually increases its production, its average cost curve and the marginal cost curve starts falling as output keeps on increasing. So thus a monopoly starts realizing economies of scale, and such a monopoly where the average cost and the marginal cost curves are falling continuously is called a natural monopoly. Such a monopoly will incur very high costs in the beginning, but as the monopoly increases its output level, its costs will keep on falling. Now think about the new firm who wants to enter and compete with this monopolist. If a new firm plans to enter and compete with the monopolist, initially it will have to incur very high costs and at the same time manage with lower output levels, which is very difficult. It is very difficult for a firm to enter with very high costs and very low output levels. So you all can think about the best example of natural monopoly we have in our economy called Indian Railways. Now, Indian Railways is a perfect example of natural monopoly. Initially, the costs are very high. The costs of building engines, the costs of laying down the tracks between various states. Initial costs are very high. But once the tracks have been laid, once the engines have been built, once the structure has been built for the railways, now eventually the costs keep on falling with time because the main fixed costs have been incurred. Now we just have variable costs. Okay. Now think about another firm who plans to enter and compete with Indian Railways. Now, Indian Railways has already done its bulk production and is in the falling phase of costs. Think about a new firm who enters and starts competing with Indian Railways. That new firm will have to lay down whole tracks again, will have to build engines again. Okay, so that means initially the new firm will have to incur a very high cost and will have to manage with very low output levels as compared to Indian Railways who is producing the services in bulk, who is carrying goods and services in bulk. That means it's in case of technical barrier, it is very difficult for a new firm to enter and challenge the monopolist. Why? Because the monopolist has already done its bulk production, realizing economies of scale. Since a monopolist has already captured the market and is producing in bulk, it is realizing economies of scale, its average and marginal cost curves are falling. So any new firm who enters, very difficult for that firm to compete with the monopolist. Why? Because that firm will have to incur very high cost in the beginning and will have to do with very low output levels. So if you want to understand, you can even understand using a diagram. So You can see this is my output levels. This is my average cost. So you can see in case of a natural monopoly, the average cost curve is continuously falling and it becomes asymptotic to the x-axis. So you can see the initial costs are very high. Initial costs are high, but as you keep on producing output in bulk, because of economies of scale, your average cost starts falling. Now think about a monopolist. A monopolist is already there in the market and is producing in bulk. Now think about the new firm who plans to enter and compete with the monopolist. That firm will have to incur a very high average cost and will have to start with very low output levels. Now it is very difficult for a firm to start its operations with very high costs and very low output levels and compete with the monopolist. So it acts like a technical barrier. So I hope all students have understood the technical barrier point. There is one more technical barrier. Okay. This was point A. This is another point B within technical barrier. Another technical barrier of the monopolist, or I can say another technical basis of monopoly, is the special knowledge of a low cost productive technique. Clearly, the monopolist has an incentive. To keep its technology a secret. A monopolist has an incentive to keep its technology as a secret. So this is another technical barrier. When we talk about a monopolist, what is the reason for a firm being a monopolist? That firm may have a low cost productive technique which no other firm in the industry has. That is why that firm is a monopolist at the first place, because that firm has some low cost productive technique which no other firm has. Now this is like a weapon for the monopolist. That is why the firm is a monopolist at the first place, because it has a technique which no other firm has. And that is something which the monopolist has kept as a secret. There are patents for it. There are copyrights for it. Because if everyone in the economy gets access to this low cost productive technique, then there will not be any monopoly at the first place. A monopoly exists at the first place because there is some low cost productive technology which acts like a weapon for the monopolist. So I hope all students have understood that one of the crucial reasons for monopoly to exist is technical barriers. It simply means that when the monopoly does production in bulk, its average and the marginal cost curves continue to fall, thus realizing economies of scale. Such a monopoly is called natural monopoly. Example, Indian Railways. It's the best example of natural monopoly. No firm would want to enter and compete with the monopolist. Why? Because if a new firm enters, initially it will have to incur very high costs and manage with low output levels. So it will be very difficult for that firm to compete with the monopolist who has already captured the market and who is doing the production in bulk and whose costs are also falling because of economies of scale. The second reason for technical barrier to exist is because a monopoly will always possess some low cost productive technique which no other firm in the industry has. The monopolist will obviously get it patented, or the monopolist will obtain the trademark or the copyright for it, which makes it the monopoly at the first place. Now, let's look at another barrier to entry. This is called as legal barriers. This is called as legal barriers. So what are legal barriers? So basically we also have monopolies which are created by law. Some monopolies are created by natural conditions. Some monopolies are created by law. Okay? So some monopolies are created by law rather than economic conditions. So what happens? So a government created monopoly, a government granted monopoly position, a government granted monopoly position is the legal protection of a product by a copyright or a patent. Okay, so now in this case, the government is creating a monopoly. The government is creating a monopoly by giving the monopolist the copyright or the patent for it. Okay, so these copyrights or patents make the innovation more profitable. These copyrights or patents make the innovation more profitable. Okay, so this was the first point within the legal barriers. The second point within the legal barrier. So another example of a legally created monopoly is the awarding of an exclusive franchise to serve the market. Okay, so in this case, the restriction of entry is combined with a regulatory cap on the price the franchised monopolist can charge. The price the franchised monopolist can charge. Okay. So the second point is also a very important point. So we have another example of legally created monopolies, which are called franchise monopolies. Okay. So franchise monopolies can be in the case of public utility services. It can be used in the case of communication, post offices, etc. So in case of a franchise monopoly, the government grants the monopoly position along with the condition that the maximum price that can be charged is fixed by the government. So franchise monopolies are those monopolies which are given the monopoly position by the government. The government grants them monopoly position. The government will make sure that no other firm comes and competes with them. But then the government will also tell them that what's the maximum price they can charge. Franchise monopolies, or what I can say, the government created monopolies, do not have the freedom to charge any price. Government created monopolies will charge the price which the government wants them to charge. So the government will fix a regulatory cap. The franchised monopolist cannot charge a price above that price. So let me quickly revise with all the students once again. We are currently talking about legal barriers. When I talk about legal barrier, it is a monopoly created by law. Some monopolies are created by natural conditions. Some monopolies are created by law. So legal barriers will consist of monopolies which are created by the order of the government. How does the government create a monopoly? A government creates a monopoly by granting that monopolist the patent or the copyright for the product it is producing. Obviously, that copyright or patent will make innovation more profitable. Another example of legally created monopoly is exclusive franchise to serve the market. What happens in case of a franchise monopoly? In case of a franchise monopoly, the government gives the monopoly position to the firm. The government will make sure that no other firm enters the market and competes with the monopolist. But then the franchise monopoly does not have the complete freedom to charge any price. The franchised monopolist will be ordered by the government to charge a specific price. So there is a cap the government fixes, which is called as the regulatory cap. So the restriction of entry is combined with the regulatory cap on the price the franchise monopolist can charge. So when the government is doing something for the monopolist by not allowing other firms to come and compete, the government also wants something in return. And what is that? A regulatory cap on the maximum price the monopolist can charge. That is something which is taken care of by the government. The government will tell the monopolist that you cannot charge a price above this. We have given the monopoly position to you. You cannot charge a price above this particular amount. So I hope all students have understood the concept of technical and legal barriers. Okay, so now moving forward, let's talk about profit maximization under monopoly. So profit maximization under monopoly. Now let's draw the diagram. We have done the profit maximization under monopoly in the first year also of economics honors. This is output per period. This is price and cost. This is my initial demand curve. The demand curve facing the monopolist is downward sloping. Why? Because the monopolist will be able to sell more output only at a lower price. So the demand curve facing the monopolist is downward sloping, and the demand curve facing the monopolist is also called the average revenue curve. The demand curve facing the monopolist is also called the AR curve. Why? Because all students should recall that average revenue is nothing but total revenue by Q. Total revenue is nothing but P as a function of Q into Q by Q. P as a function of Q means, remember in the start of the lecture, I had told you that the monopolist will first decide the quantity and price will be chosen depending on the quantity produced of the monopolist. When we had started with the lecture today, I had told you that the monopolist has control over either price or quantity. The monopolist does not have control over both. So the assumption which we had taken was that the monopolist will choose what quantity to produce to maximize the profits, and based on that the price will be decided. That means price is a function of quantity produced by the monopolist. So average revenue is total revenue divided by Q. Total revenue is P as a function of Q into Q divided by Q. Q and Q cancel, so therefore my average revenue is nothing but price as a function of quantity, which is nothing but the demand curve facing the monopolist. Demand curve facing the monopolist. Okay, then we have the MR curve. The MR curve lies below the demand curve. All of us know, and MR can even be negative. That means I can even stretch this line to the negative axis. MR can even be negative. So MR curve lies below the AR curve. How do we find MR? Mathematically, MR is nothing but the slope of the total revenue curve. So if I differentiate my total revenue with respect to Q, I get my marginal revenue. So marginal revenue is the derivative of the total revenue with respect to quantity, Q. Then we have the marginal cost curve. This is my marginal cost curve. Okay. And then all of us know, where will a monopolist produce? We have already done it. The monopolist will produce. So a monopolist will produce that level of quantity. A monopolist will produce that level of quantity at which point number 1, MR is equal to MC. Point number 2, MC cuts the MR curve from below. MC cuts the MR curve from below. So these were the two conditions for the level of for the monopolist, the profit maximizing of the monopolist. A monopolist will produce that level of quantity at which MR is equal to MC. So in the diagram, you can see MR is equal to MC at this point, quantity produced by the monopolist, and the price charged by the monopolist will be given by the demand curve. Now, if I extend it to the demand curve, this is the price charged by the monopolist PM. How did we get this MR equal to MC condition? That also all the students should know. Maximize the profit of the monopolist, which is total revenue minus total cost. And what does the monopolist choose? The monopolist chooses Q. The monopolist will choose Q. So if you look at the first order condition, whenever we do the maximization or minimization, we put the first order derivative equal to 0. So if I differentiate TR minus TC with respect to Q, what do I get? DTR by DQ minus DTC by DQ is equal to 0, which implies DTR by DQ is equal to D of TC by DQ. What is the derivative of total revenue with respect to Q? MR. What is the derivative of the total cost function with respect to Q? MC. So you can all see that the profit maximization of the monopolist will occur where marginal revenue is exactly equal to the marginal cost, and the sufficient condition, MR equal to MC, is the necessary condition. This is the necessary condition. What is the sufficient condition? The sufficient condition is that the MR curve should cut the MC curve should cut the MR curve from below. You can see the MC curve is cutting the MR curve from below. That is the sufficient condition for profit maximization of the monopolist. Then some of you might also be thinking that why the MR curve is below the AR curve. So we can even look at the mathematical reason for it. So let us look at it. Why is MR curve below the AR curve? So mathematically also it should be convincing to all the students attending this lecture. So why is MR curve below the AR curve? So let's look at the reason. What is my total revenue? My total revenue is price as a function of quantity into quantity. My total revenue is price into quantity, right? But price itself is also a function of quantity. Okay. Now, if I differentiate it, so therefore, DTR by DQ, I can use the product rule for differentiation. P of Q into Q ka derivative is 1 plus Q into P of Q ka derivative will be dP by dQ with respect to Q. So guys, this dTR by dQ is nothing but the marginal revenue. P of Q is nothing but the average revenue, because all of us know that average revenue is nothing but P of Q. We just found out 5 minutes back that my average revenue is nothing but the demand curve, which is P of Q, plus Q times dP by dQ. Now all of us know that the demand curve is downward sloping. If the demand curve is downward sloping, my dP by dQ is negative. So I can say MR is equal to AR plus something which is negative. So this implies MR is less than AR. And since MR is less than AR, MR curve lies below the AR curve. I again repeat, dTR by dQ is MR, P of Q is AR, plus Q times dP by dQ. dP by dQ sign is negative because the demand curve is downward sloping. So MR is equal to AR plus some negative term. That means MR is less than AR, so MR curve lies below the AR curve. This was mathematical reason. Logical reason is that changes in marginal in economics, changes in marginal are always faster than changes in average, because marginal takes into account only the change in total revenue, but average takes into account the whole total revenue as well. Marginal captures only the change. Average is derived from total. So always remember, in economics, be it any curve, changes in marginal are always faster than changes in average. That is why you can see MR falls more sharply as compared to AR. Or another way of putting it, MR curve is more steeper than the AR curve. You can see it in the diagram also. AR curve is more flatter. MR curve is more steeper. MR curve is more steeper means fall in MR is faster than fall in AR. That is why MR curve lies below the AR curve. So I hope both the reasons are convincing to the students. The mathematical reason also you can see on your screen. The logical reason also is that changes in marginal are faster than changes in average, which causes the marginal curve to fall at a steeper rate as compared to the AR curve. Hence, the MR curve lies below the AR curve. So I hope the students are clear with this. So in this diagram, the quantity produced by the monopolist is QM, where MR is equal to MC, and the price charged by the monopolist is given by the demand curve PM. So I hope students are clear with this. If I also add the average cost curve here, suppose let me add the average cost curve somewhere here. Suppose this is my average cost curve. All of us know that the average cost curve is U-shaped. Okay. Now, if I ask you what is the cost of the monopolist at the quantity level QM, what is my average cost? This is my average cost. So I can say my total revenue is rectangle PME QMO. This is my origin. So this whole rectangle is my total revenue, PME QMO, and my total cost is the rectangle CAQMO. My total cost is C A Q M O. So what will my profit be? Profit will be the difference between the rectangle depicting total revenue and the rectangle depicting the total cost. So my profit will be the bigger rectangle PMEQMO minus the smaller rectangle CAQMO. So this is my profit. So I can say the profit of the monopolist pi m will be the rectangle. Profit will be the rectangle PMEAC. The profit will be the rectangle PM, E, A and C. So you can see that in this case, the monopolist is making supernormal profit. The monopolist is making supernormal profits. Okay. And now the last thing we do for the day, after which we stop. This is called as the inverse elasticity rule. Inverse elasticity rule. So let's derive this. So consider my total revenue as price as a function of quantity into quantity. If I differentiate, what is my marginal revenue? If I differentiate it using the product rule, P of Q into Q ka derivative is 1 plus Q into P ka derivative is dP by dQ. So therefore, my marginal revenue is, I can, for simplicity, I can write P of Q as just P plus Q times dP by dQ. I've just done it for simplicity. P of Q, I'm writing it as P. So therefore, marginal revenue is P into 1 plus Q by P times dP by dQ. Okay, I have taken P common. And guys, what is this whole term? You can see it is the inverse of elasticity. Recall, elasticity is nothing but P by Q into dQ by dP. Elasticity is nothing but P by Q into dQ by dP. So Q by P into dP by dQ will be the inverse of elasticity, which is 1 upon E. So now, at the profit maximizing level, MR is equal to MC. So therefore, I can say that MC is nothing but MR. What is my MR? My MR is P times 1 plus 1 upon E. So if MC is equal to P times 1 plus 1 upon E, therefore minus MC will be equal to minus P times 1 plus 1 upon E. Adding P on both sides, therefore P minus MC is equal to P minus P times 1 plus 1 upon E. What we have done? Adding P on both sides. Adding P or price on both sides. And now dividing by P on both sides, what do we get? P minus PC by P is equal to P minus P times 1 plus 1 upon E divided by P. Therefore, P minus PC by P is nothing but P times 1 minus 1 upon E upon P. P and P cancels. So P minus PC by P is nothing but minus 1 upon E. So what does the above equation tell us? So observation. The above equation tells us that the gap between the price and the marginal cost, also called the markup, is inversely related to the elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand. So the observation is telling us what? Let us even write more observations, but first let's look at this observation. The above equation is telling us that the gap between the price and the marginal cost, which we also call as the markup, P minus MC is called the absolute markup. P minus MC divided by P is called the relative markup. So I'm writing it on the top. P minus MC is called the absolute markup. Markup means the price charged over and above the marginal cost. This is my absolute markup, and if I do P minus MC by P, this is my relative markup. So the above equation is telling us that the gap between the price and the marginal cost, also called the markup, is inversely related to the elasticity of demand. So now let's do some more observations on this. So till now, if I sum up, we have the following equations. In deriving the inverse elasticity rule, my marginal revenue has come out as P times 1 plus 1 upon E. My second equation is that my marginal cost is nothing but equal to at the profit maximizing level, MC is equal to MR, which implies my MC is equal to, what is my MR? This whole term. And the third equation which we have derived is that P minus MC by P is equal to minus 1 upon E. So what are the observations we learned from the above equations? Observations from the above equations. The first observation we learn from the above equation is a monopolist will always choose to operate on the elastic portion of the demand curve. Monopolist will always choose to operate on the elastic portion of the demand curve. That is, elastic portion of the demand curve, if I label it as EQP, elasticity of demand, that is EQP will be less than -1. Less than -1 means -2, -3, -4. These are all elastic portions. He will never operate on the inelastic portion. He will never operate on the inelastic portion of the demand curve. That is where my EQP is greater than -1. Greater than -1 would mean -half. Greater than -1 means what? If I draw a real line, less than -1 means -2, -3, and so on. Greater than -1 means -half, 0, towards 0. Okay? So what I am trying to say here is that the monopolist will never operate on the inelastic portion. Now let us see if the monopolist operates on the inelastic portion. So suppose the monopolist operates on the inelastic portion. Now, if the monopolist operates on the inelastic portion, that is EQP is more than -1. Say, let us take an example. Suppose EQP is equal to -half. Then my marginal revenue will be P into 1 plus 1 upon -half, which is P into 1 minus 2, which is -P. Therefore, which is less than 0. Therefore, when I can say when my EQP elasticity is more than -1, marginal revenue becomes negative, which cannot be equated with the positive MC. If I say that the monopolist is on the inelastic portion of the demand curve means EQP is more than -1. If I put it in this equation, my MR becomes negative. And I cannot equate a negative MR with a positive MC. I cannot equate a negative MR with a positive MC. That means a monopolist will never operate on the inelastic portion of the demand curve. You can even look at it logically. If the demand is inelastic, when the monopolist will reduce its price, since the demand is inelastic, quantity demanded will go up only by a tiny amount, which will cause the total revenue of the monopolist to fall. Because total revenue is nothing but price into quantity. If price is falling by a larger amount and demand is inelastic, it means quantity demanded will go up only by a tiny amount. Now, if one value is going down by a larger amount and another value is going up by a tiny amount, the whole product is falling. So the first observation we learned today is that monopolist will never operate on the inelastic portion of the demand curve. A monopolist will always operate on the elastic portion. Elastic portion means EQP is less than -1. Now you guys can put EQP less than -1 in the equation. Take a value less than -1, suppose -2. Put -2 here. You will get MR is equal to P times 1 minus half, which is P by 2. So marginal revenue is positive. And since marginal revenue is positive, you can equate a positive marginal cost with a positive marginal revenue. And when the demand curve is elastic, what will it mean? So this was the case when you were on the inelastic portion. When you were on the inelastic portion. But when you are on the elastic portion, then what will happen? When you are on the elastic portion, when price falls, since the demand is elastic, it will go up by a larger amount. It's more sensitive, which will cause my total revenue, which is the product of two, to rise. And this is what the monopolist wants, that the total revenue should go up. So the first thing we learned from these three equations is that a monopolist will never operate on the inelastic portion of the demand curve. He will always operate on the elastic portion of the demand curve. And the last thing we learn from this particular, and that's the last thing for the day. So I am erasing the first observation. And then we look at the next observation. So I hope all students are enjoying the lecture. Everything is very logical. So if you are trying to understand it on logical grounds, you will never make mistakes. The second particular observation is that the firm's markup over the marginal cost depends inversely on the elasticity of market demand. The firm's markup over the marginal cost varies inversely with the elasticity of demand. So I can say higher the elasticity of demand, would imply lower the markup over the marginal cost, and lower the elasticity of demand, it implies higher the markup over and above the marginal cost. If you want to take an example, you can take an example. If my EQP is -2, then my P minus MC by P will be -1 by -2, which implies P minus MC by P will be equal to half, which implies 2P minus 2MC is equal to P, which will imply my P is equal to 2 times MC. The price charged is double the marginal cost. But if my EQP is -10, -10 means it has become even more elastic. Remember, as you are moving away from -1 towards the left, in this direction, elasticity is increasing. It's becoming more elastic. So if you take EQP as -10, it implies P minus MC by P is equal to -1 by -10, which implies P minus MC by P is equal to 1 by 10, which implies that my 10P minus 10MC is equal to P, which implies 9P is equal to 10MC, or I can say that my P is nothing but 10 by 9. Now guys, how much is 10 by 9? 1.1. So 1.1 times MC. So you can see that when my elasticity was -2, price was double the marginal cost. But as my elasticity has gone up from -2 to -10, ignore the minus, look at the absolute value. Initially my absolute value was 2, now my absolute value is 10. Don't look at the minus. Elasticity has a negative sign because demand curve is downward sloping. But look at the magnitude. From 2 it has gone up to 10. That means elasticity has become more elastic. Demand has become more elastic. When we say that demand has become more elastic, markup falls. Why? Because when demand has become more elastic, the monopolist knows that the public is very sensitive. So he cannot charge a very high price over and above the marginal cost. But when demand becomes more inelastic, the monopolist knows that if the demand becomes relatively inelastic, then the monopolist can charge a very high price over the marginal cost because he knows that people will still buy. Inelastic means people are handcuffed. They will still buy. When the demand is more elastic, then the gap between the price and the marginal cost will be very low. But when the demand is inelastic, the gap between the price and the marginal cost will be very high. So this is something you can see. When the demand was, when the elasticity was -2, price was double the marginal cost. But as elasticity went up from 2 to 10, price is only 1.1 times the marginal cost. That means an increase in elasticity in absolute terms causes the markup to fall. As you can see, as elasticity in absolute terms goes up from 2 to 10, the markup, initially the price was double the marginal cost, P was 2 times MC, now my P is only 1.1 times MC. Okay, so this is where I stop in the lecture today. What we have done today, we have started with the concept of monopoly. We have done barriers to entry, how a monopoly is created, legal barriers and technical barriers. We have done the profit maximization of the monopoly. We have done the diagram depicting profit maximization. We have done the conditions of profit maximization, and we have done the inverse elasticity rule today. So we will continue with the same topic in the next lecture. I hope all students have enjoyed the lecture today. Any doubt, you can unmute your mic and ask, or you can call me, or you can mail me your doubts at divineschooloфeconomics@gmail.com.